Hello everybody, Danny or Maccam here. It's been a long while since I've done a video, and it's in an entirely new place. So, it's going to be a bit of an adjustment and a bit of a change. But today, I decided instead of doing the traditional videos that I do with basketball, I'm just going to end up doing one where I'm going to talk in person to you guys right here on camera. So, as you probably have figured by the content on this channel, there is a lot of NBA stuff. It's primarily NBA stuff, but it's actually primarily about the Portland Trailblazers. So you could probably figure I'm from around the area where the Trailblazers are, and that I am a fan of the team, and of course I am. And this last 4-0 sweep obviously has gotten most of us fans, and even a lot of the local media and analysts, including ones that are literally tied directly to the team, that work for the team, are actually already just outright saying, I hope the new GM has a lot better direction and actually can fix whatever the hell's going wrong right now because we can't keep doing this. And the team is in a perpetual state of stagnance, which is exactly how it was during the days when Brandon Roy and Greg Oden both were forced to retire because, of course, both of them had knees that would make your grandpa's knees suddenly look like they were made of spring. And yeah, so it's actually a lot similar to the day and age where they retired, and then we had Nate McMillan, who's a defensive specialist coach, wasn't known for his offense, and we had this team where it was plenty good enough to still get into the playoffs, even though we didn't always get into the playoffs, but we still were able to. We just weren't able to complete a series at all. In fact, we we had a lot of trouble as a team figuring ourselves out, especially considering we still, for a little while after they left, had most of our core still there. And it wasn't until I believe the offseason leading into the 2012-13 season that that's when our core suddenly officially was completely gone, disintegrated. In fact, actually, it was the 2011-12 offseason going to the 2011-12, actually, I think, because I think that was when we got Gerald Wallace and Jay Crossover on the team. But we kept getting decent to good players, and a lot of people would probably argue that it's playoff experience that we're lacking now that's causing our issues right now. But in reality, it's not actually a playoff experience at all. In fact, the problem is the same as it was back then, except there's a little additional set of issues underlying and intertwined into that this time, because obviously we don't have remotely as high chemistry, I would say, as we did back then, or at least it's a different kind of chemistry. And it's certainly a very, very different kind of leadership than we had before with LaMarcia in place, and now we have Lillian instead. So it's a big shift. And also, during that time, there's so many different nuanced details. LaMarcia was suddenly getting more and more ego-driven because Lillian started being and slowly morphing in fact, not even slowly, it was really fast. He just suddenly got shunted into the you're the face of the franchise, and LaMarcia was suddenly cut out as a kind of a sidekick. And he did not like that. Once he finally became the leader of the team and the main guy, when Brandon Roy was forced to retire, he wanted to stay that way. And he didn't like it when suddenly some other kid comes on the team, is already killing it offensively enough, and matches the new coaching style, that suddenly he's unhappy because he's not getting exactly what he wanted, which is actually why LaMarcia suddenly said, I demand to be traded to Greg Popovich this last offseason, is because of the fact he was pissed off because Kawhi Leonard was the face of the franchise, and he always was going to be, and he was really, really, really pissed because, and he was kind of dissenting because he's like, I'm not gonna tolerate this unless I am the one and only option on offense, and I am the face of the franchise. And Kawhi Leonard got injured this season, and suddenly LaMarcia suddenly seemed to be playing back more, not completely, but more towards his normal self, and leading them to the playoffs again. That's only because of the fact that Kawhi got injured and left because he got injured, and then has refused to return back to the team or play at all, or even go into practices or scrimmages at all, even though he's healthy and cleared to do so, he's not willing to do so because now he's also unhappy, clearly, and it makes perfect sense that that's because that's how LaMarcia now works. Ever since Damian came into the league, suddenly LaMarcus is like a pouty little child. He doesn't play, he doesn't care, he doesn't want to be there. He's dissenting, throwing temper tantrums, complaining, whining, and demanding trades unless he's center of attention, number one, the only one. Which, as I've now repeated multiple times, he has been this season because of the Kawhi Leonard injury. That's the only reason why he suddenly isn't complaining. He's been fine this season. In fact, he's been happy and he's been actually playing enough. He's leading them to the playoffs. He is requiring himself to be the center of the ego of the team, the center of the attention, the center of what everybody sees the team as, and their franchise player. They want him. He wants to be that. Nobody else wants that, but he wants that, and he's feeling like he's done that to improve why he should be this season. But that was part of the reason why, is because Damian came in, and then suddenly we started falling apart a little bit because LaMarcia was being LaMarcia. He was getting more and more pouty, more frustrated, and that's why he left in free agency for San Antonio. One, he's closer to home because he comes from Dallas area, but two is because of the fact that he thought he could win a championship there, and the main reason actually is because of the fact he felt he could potentially be center of attention there, except he slumped. His first 2 seasons there, he went way down in the second season, or his first season there, and everybody's like, oh, that's because he's part of the Spurs, right? You go into the second season, and he was far worse, and yet he was played far more, and that's because of the fact he was still not center of attention. Kawhi Leonard is still center of attention, and he does not fit in that environment anymore because of the one and only Damian Lillard. So that's what was happening slowly. It was a morphology thing with him, why he would eventually leave and why we couldn't make it past a certain point was because he even expressed that frustration indirectly and let it come out sideways sort of during games and also in the post interviews in the playoffs that last season he was there. He was starting to kind of burst at the seams with steam coming out of him erratically at all different points because he was not okay with not being the second option instead of the first. And not the face of the franchise, but now the kind of sidekick to the face of the franchise, and he didn't want to be that. So, my main point is that's kind of contributed to a part of it, is the shift in coaching philosophy and the shift in culture and the shift in who was number one on the team. So that was more recently. And then you get Neil O'Shea in as well, and you hope that's like, oh, this is kind of exciting. He has a lot of potential. You get him in. He's now proven to this point he's not an improvement at all. In fact, he's actually a step back. In fact, a couple of steps back because he cannot get even as good of older players, veteran players with experience and still some skill and ability as our last GM did, which I can't remember if that was Pritchard or not. But it was Pritchard, whatever. But it was he's actually worse, and I hate saying that, but he's actually worse because he cannot build the team. He doesn't know how to build a team right. He thinks he does. He's talked like it, and you can tell that his talk in the exit interviews yesterday were literally and only really to kind of make himself look really, really good and not arrogant, while actually it's a form of arrogance because he's just trying to protect his own job and his own philosophies. Like, oh, it's just 4 games. You can't judge my performance of the team's performance in 4 games. You can't say that you need to officially start from scratch or trade CJ Damian because it's 4 games. I mean, it's disappointing, but you can't do that. It's not just 4 games, buddy. It's the entire time you've been here that kind of prove there's a problem. And Terry Stotts is not... It's a complete polar opposite of the Nate McMillan, Roy, and Odinless Blazers in that transition, that really awkward transition period, because Nate McMillan, defensive strategist, he's actually better offensively in terms of being defensive focused and strategy-wise. He's always been that. He always will be that. He'll always be known for his defense. In terms of offensive strategy, which he's actually pretty dang good at, usually. I'm not sure how he's really done too well, although then again, being the head coach of Indy this season, look at where Indy is, including in the playoffs right now. kind of suggests he's still better than people are giving him credit for. He actually really worked it out. Terry Stotts still hasn't seemed to figure out defensive schemes. Still hasn't seemed to figure out how exactly to emphasize and build up his own defensive strategies and his own defensive coaching abilities, along with the team's confidence in their defense and their abilities. He just hasn't seemed to have been doing that the entire time. Not to say he should be let go or fired, or that he's a part of the causation, although technically, in a way, he sort of is part of the odd, random, shouldn't be success, but successes that we've had since he's became a coach, 5 straight seasons in the playoffs. He's obviously a big reason for that. However, he's also a big reason why we can't get past the first round in the playoffs, no matter who we play. Because he, as the head coach, you have to be able to develop your own coaching talents and skills. You have to be able to develop something that have a gray area or you're just playing bad at. And defenses went from playing bad at to it's sketchy gray area for him, and he hasn't really built past that point. It was cool to see him built up to that point, which took a couple of steps up in his first 2 seasons, but after that, the 2 seasons after his first starting season. But now, these last 2 seasons, the last season this season, he hasn't progressed in that department at all. Yusuf Nurkic is the one who motivated our team to even go for that, to even get a little more defensively confident and a little more defensively aggressive. Which actually kind of brings, mentioning Yusuf, since I've already explained that part, now brings me to another thing that's the same as it was with Nate McMillan in the early 2010s problem we had when we're Royless and Odinless and going through that awkward transition phase, is inconsistent players. We have players that lack confidence and don't know how to stay consistent. Consistency's always been our biggest, most agonizing bane as a team for the longest time. I only really got into NBA basketball, especially starting around 2009-2010 season, and then 2010-11 season is when I officially kind of could consider myself a fan officially of basketball and any teams in the league. It started really, really late. Obviously, that was only 8 years ago, but at that point, it got me into it enough, and I was into it enough that I started to study the older teams and how our schemes worked and how we worked and and then other teams and this, that, the other thing. I got myself caught up as I could, building up to that point, and then that way I was already prepared for whatever came next. I already knew what I needed to know prior to that. And so with that era of just losing those two, still having Nate McMillan as coach, going through the transition phase, inconsistent players was still our biggest bane. Even with Brandon Roy and Greg Oden, inconsistency was still a huge bane, especially considering it's really just, I should really just be saying Brandon Roy, because Greg Oden played a grand total of 82 games in his entire 4 years with us. That was 82 games. That's one single season worth of games total, yet that was 4 total seasons. He only played over the course of the seasons, all fractioned and splintered apart, scattered across the seasons, 4 seasons. He only played 82 games. So really, even though he made a surprising impact, even non-visually, non-statistically, like not on the general stat sheet, you wouldn't necessarily see it. But he did make one hell of a positive impact on that team to the extent we went 50-12 in the 82 games he was able to, or in the rather 62 games that those three, our big three, had actually ever played together. Greg Oden, Brandon Roy, LaMarcus Aldridge. We went 50-12 while they were able to play on the court. And all of our losses were actually really hard fought and really close. I mean, the trio struck some fear and really probably could have potentially developed into a dynasty if Greg Oden didn't have grandpa legs And Brandon Roy didn't have knees that were eating themselves from inside out because apparently they had stomachs and they had one hell of an endless appetite for their own flesh and their own existence. Don't ask me how that worked, but he did have self-eating knees. Cannibalistic knees is what he had. And yeah, you have grandpa legs over there. So, and grandpa everything, actually. He looked old. Really old. Anyway, but if you didn't have that, we probably would have been a dynasty. But even then, and even if it did end up a dynasty, we didn't have that. With the 15-12 games, the 15-12 record with all three of them together playing, we would have still not, I don't think, gotten past even the Western Conference. Like, we could have gotten to the Western Conference Finals for sure, I think. Probably multiple times, many times. I think we would have had a really rough time even getting to the actual finals because we had such inconsistent players. And the difference between that roster with inconsistency and the inconsistency that we have with our current rosters this last 5 seasons, including this season, is the fact, because inconsistency is the only consistency in the Blazers teams, unfortunately. But the main difference is, back then, even when you picked up role players, we were picking up very valuable veterans. We got Cupcake Felton, we got Jay Crossover, we got Geraldine Wallace, we got all these other people. Yeah, all these different people. We got Andre Miller, of course. We kept him around. We kept Marcus Camby. We signed him and kept him. We still had Joel Prisbilla, the Great White Gorilla, for a while. We had tons of people, and they all had lots of playoff experience. In fact, everyone I just mentioned of those veterans, they had a lot of playoff experience between them. Andre Miller, Marcus Camby, and Gerald Wallace were the ones who went by far the deepest, the most consistently in playoffs matches. I mean, they brought so much leadership and so much important contributions, including statistically, let alone non-noticeable outright statistics, and just vocally and locker room presence and everything. They were what was supposed to be kind of a mentoring backbone to the team while also still directly contributing on the court. And yet, as they did that, we still kept hitting a certain a certain wall, which every time came down to the inconsistent play of our role players. And even our starters, Nick Batum, would 100% guaranteed be arguably the best player of this modern era since Michael Jordan, if he wasn't so frickin' incompetent, hesitant, and inconsistent. If he gained those three things, so he gained his confidence, kept the confidence, when at that point, whenever he had confidence, he would almost be guaranteed for a Boone and Crockett, a 5x5 game. I mean, he was despicably talented. He still is, but the problem is now his age has kind of came to bite him in his butt, along with injury proneness. But he's not all that injury prone. We've had far more injury prone players, and he still played through a lot of his injuries to actually a pretty decent extent. But the problem is his inconsistency. He was literally the most inconsistent player I think we've ever had. And it was so exciting and thrilling to have him and watch him play. At the same time, it was also some of the most infuriating thing because you knew what he was capable of. He could literally get double digits in every single frickin' statistic during any game in like 30 to 32 minutes of play, even 28 minutes, because that's how talented he was. He could do that almost every night, probably. And yet, because he was so hesitant, inconsistent, and inconfident, it went nowhere in the 7 seasons that we had him on the team. Rudy Fernandez was an amazing flamethrower off the bench, and he was fantastic to also engage the crowd because he also was insanely athletic, especially when it came down to dunking. I have a rule, which is that white guys can't jump unless you're a Spaniard and your name is Rudy Fernandez, because that is a fact. He is very white, and he's the only white person I've ever seen have the springs that he did, let alone the ability to manipulate his body while sprung up in midair, going for a dunk. But the problem was he was fairly inconsistent. He wasn't remotely as inconsistent as Nikola, but he was painfully inconsistent because he was what is called a streaky sharpshooter. He went in streaks. He had hot streaks and very, very cold streaks. And when I say cold, I mean he was a freaking iceberg. And he just took a lot of energy out of the team when he was on a cold streak. And then as soon as he got back on a hot streak, everybody started to click again because it's like he was just that polarizing, no pun intended because icebergs, but of a player. He was that important to the team and almost a backbone, if you will, as well. Just like Nikola was kind of a glue guy as well. Rudy was kind of a glue guy and multiple different facets. But he was streaky, which means he was inconsistent. Though he didn't have the confidence problem that Nikola has always had. Elliott was very streaky and inconsistent. You never knew quite what you were going to get out of him. Patty was still streaky and consistent at that point. All of our main guys off the bench were still streaky and inconsistent. And we, of course, like I said, our starter was Nikola Batum at small forward. He was streaky and inconsistent. He always has been. And so my point being, even Wes was still streaky and inconsistent. So my point being is the main bane and realistically, the only real problem that is really inhibiting us now, as it did back then, and keeping us so stagnant, is obtaining and maintaining our most inconsistent contributors and players. We have such inconsistent players. Yusuf Nurkic is woefully inconsistent and hesitant, and also seems to lack a lot of confidence most games. For some reason, until the playoffs came around, and then suddenly he kind of picks it up, and suddenly he seems a lot more confident and aggressive. Don't know where that comes from, but for some reason it's only really late season, and then playoffs, maybe he considers it. So far, we haven't really gotten much of him in the playoffs, because the only time we got him in the playoffs was once last season, and then late in the series this game. That was late in the series too, actually, the last playoffs, I believe, when he finally came back. But inconsistency is what you expect from him, just like at Nikola. You hope you're going to get the beast out of him, but you're probably not going to. You realize that's realistic. It's kind of a pain in the ass. Consistent Mo Harkless is not existing. Ed Davis is the most consistent player I think we have on the entire team. You know what you're going to get out of him every single night, including offensively. You know what he can and cannot do, what his talents are, if he's going to remain consistent, all of that. Ed Davis is literally our most consistent player. He is the only arguably consistent player that we have. Even Damian Lillard is very streaky and very, very inconsistent. CJ McCollum is very inconsistent. He's less inconsistent than he was last season, this season, but he still is inconsistent. It's a royal pain in the ass. And also, it's just... So, basically, the number one bane and the number one real issue that we have as a team, and why we're always stuck in this stagnant state of, well, it's going to be somewhere within, 5, maybe 8 games of 500 record. Probably more like 500 record, right? Yeah. You're stuck. Congratulations, you're mediocre at best. Have fun. The new Charlotte Hornets. Kill me. We're literally, that's another thing, we're doing literally exactly the same thing that the Charlotte Hornets have been doing for way too long. They have been stagnant where they are this season, where they were last season, where they were the season before. They've been stagnant for seasons straight because the directors of player operations and the GM and the scouts all have their same philosophies they will not back down from. They will not back down from what they will and will not do. And they will not back down from maintaining the exact same roster pretty much they've had just about the entire time. Which is a royal problem because they're trying to do it with coach. They keep firing coach, fire coach, fire coach, fire coach. Because they want to blame somebody, and in their minds, for some reason, the only people they can blame is their coach. I guess because technically the GM and director of player operations are the main ones who tend to hire coaching staff. That's kind of their job description, so why would they throw themselves under the bus? Let's just blame it on somebody who we hired that's not a player. Let's blame it on our coaching staff. They've had a season, it's good enough. go fuck yourself. It's basically what they do. We haven't done that, but Neil O'Shea is the same as whoever the GM is in Charlotte, and the scouts are the same there as they are there too. Same director of player operations, which I believe Neil O'Shea is actually both. This is why you also need differing philosophies and differing mindsets and differing directions in your director of player operations, in your GM, in your scouts, so that they will directly challenge each other's philosophies and show each other up and say, you need to start trying something else, and we think we got what it takes to take that next step. Then maybe that does work, and so the other person's now feeling all disgruntled no matter what. But they kind of have to stick with it, and you know they're going to rob them of whatever that philosophy was, and say, okay, that obviously works, so let's take that in, because that's obviously something that will up our acumen. And so they do that, but then that one's hitting a wall. And so you have, say, scout number 2 come in and say, well, I think we need to do this, since we haven't done this yet, and you keep trying to do the same thing over and over, hitting yourself into that wall perpetually again, just like GM did. We need to do this, and then say that gets you 2 steps up. And you're literally 1 step away, but you've now, for, say, a season and a half, keep hitting your head on the wall. What do you do to take the next step? Well, let's try something else. You have another challenger. Now it's the director of player operations, hopefully different than your GM, come in and say, hey, I think we should now take this step. I think this will be the last step we need to take in order to get a championship, because we haven't tried this yet. And I see that as being the finalizing factor that's going to get us there and win it. If we try this, it does that. Maybe it works. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it at least gets into the finals a couple of times. But at least the point is that you're making progress because you don't have everybody with the same exact mindset, the same exact direction, the same exact philosophy as each other. It's like a coaching staff, except it's for building the team for the coaching staff. The coaching staff are meant not to have the same direction, the same ideologies, and the same philosophies as each other. They're meant to have very differing ideas, philosophies, specializations, all this other stuff, in order to challenge each other and build each other's acumens and talents and skills and awarenesses up, so that they can actually become better as coaching staff and actually thus better the success of the team. They're meant to actually directly challenge each other. So if you're in the middle of a game, important or not, but you're down and you say it's a bad game because you're down and you know you should be actually blowing them out in your own home court. If you've been going by the head coach, which because you have the entire game so far, something's got to change. You know that. And as an assistant coach, one of you assistants are going to have to go and directly go head-to-head and challenge and say, you need to change what you're doing right now if you want to win this game. I have what it takes. Let's do what I want to do, and I'll show you you're being an idiot. It's basically how it's supposed to work. They're supposed to give extra suggestions, extra ideas, inject their own personal philosophies that are different than the head coach. But that's the same with director of play operations, GM, scouts. They're supposed to challenge each other. They're not supposed to have the same direction, the same philosophy, the same talents, the same skill sets, the same everything else, because then you will have a stagnance, because they're only going to go the directions they want to go, and they all happen to literally be going the same direction because they all happen to have the same mindsets, the same philosophy, the same directions. You get the picture. It has to be like a coaching staff. You have to have differing minds, differing ideas, differing talents, differing everything pretty much, and then them being willing to challenge each other and say, no, you need to cut that out right now. This is not working. Everybody can see that. Somebody else needs to step up, and I'm basically going to be the one stepping up and say, you need to start doing what I'm going to do now. We need to go that direction. And then you go that direction and see what happens. That's what you have to do. We refuse to do that as an organization. For some reason, they always want everybody. I can understand why they have the right idea in the wrong context. That's how I would describe it. They want to have everybody on the same page. The problem is they're looking at it as strictly kind of business, not in any other way, when they need to be looking at it not as business, but as actually running a frickin' basketball team, not into the ground or not into mediocrity perpetually like they're doing now, but actually get up to a championship, which is their overall goal, except at the same time, they're not going anywhere. And yet, they still are demanding to stay the same. They want to go the same place they've been going for the last 5 straight seasons into the 6th straight season because, well, we made progress, right, with this team, so clearly it's working, and it's only 4 games, so we're going to do exactly what we did this entire 5 seasons that have kept us in this exact same position in perpetuity. It's a problem. It needs to be stopped. Paul Allen, of all people, is going to have to step up and kick himself in the nuts and say, you feel that? That says, in other words, get off your ass and change your own frickin' mindset and philosophy so that you can and will be willing to change up your staff from what they've been the last 8 straight seasons, pretty much, which is always sharing the same frickin' everything in their minds, because that really is our Achilles heel right now. Our organization is putting everybody in the staff and players on the same page in the wrong context. It's maddening because they've been doing this now for 8 straight seasons, although the philosophy, the only part of the philosophy that's changed and shifted with the last 5 seasons has been from defense to offense. And we're suffering the exact same issues, just with the exact same situation, minus the fact that it is now offensive instead of defensive, focused and philosophized. It's a major problem. We need all of that to change and everybody to be able to actually be willing to go at each other and say, hey, we can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting us to somehow not be literally going insane and deciding to go be the picture and face of literal definition of insanity and just keep against the same exact wall we've been doing for the same exact reason, for the same exact effort of saying, oh, it's just insert amount of games here. It's just 1 series. It's just 1 playoffs. They're young. This, that, the other thing. They do literally every freaking excuse in the book to say that they need to keep going and bang their heads against the walls as hard as they possibly can in perpetuity. That is the exact problem we have. There is no shift in the mindsets. There is no shift in philosophy. There is no shift in change. There is no shifts anywhere happening. There hasn't been for over 8 seasons. And specifically in this era, it's for 5 straight seasons. It has not had any kind of a shift whatsoever. That's what has to change. All of that has to be thrown out the window, and they have to be not just okay with, they have to intentionally, and well, they have to intend to actually change and get differing philosophies and differing mindsets, not only in the coaching realm, but specifically, obviously, in Dopo, in GM, in scouts. They have to do that. That is a huge issue. I mean, I've been tempted this entire time to just make this into one big rant against Myers-Leonard. That was one of the biggest mistakes they could have made. Like, yeah, you get it. He was super young at the time. He had a lot of potential. He was actually kind of fit our offensive schemes and systems because he was somewhat athletic enough that he could run the floor like a deer, as they always say, for 7'1" guys like him to do that. 250 pounds, already pretty built, though not that strong anyway. The problem is, he sucks. In every freaking possible way an NBA player can be incompetent, that is literally Myers-Leonard. He is incompetent in every possible facet and way an NBA player can be utterly, agonizingly, maddeningly incompetent and does not make progress. He's the exact opposite. He likes to regress and then say, as he said yesterday in the exit interviews, I dug myself into a bit of a hole the last 2 seasons. I'm sorry, that's still a cop-out. You don't actually believe that because that would be claiming that you're giving yourself self-criticism. You're saying, I did this to myself. The problem is, though that is true, you know for a fact Myers Leonard doesn't actually mean that because he sees himself as a far more talented player than he actually is and far more capable than he actually is. It would be actually probably far safer and better, and it would keep sanity more, if you actually instead decided to flip the script and put Noah Vonleh. Every time you say Myers Leonard needs some time, you just put Noah Vonleh and pretend he's Myers Leonard. That would actually work out better in, I think, every single way, especially for fans. If they just did that, that would actually work out. Though that brings me to the next subject, which is not only consistent players, but not everybody is able to develop on the Blazers team. It seems like every single organization, minus obviously the Hornets and minus obviously the Magic lately, and even arguably I'd say the Lakers still, they fail to be able to develop or have the staff to be able and capable of developing and helping the growth of any position that they acquire, whether from a trade or from a draft. They just don't seem to have the abilities to develop players correctly. And if they do develop players, they can develop like CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard. They've always proven throughout the 8+ seasons, not just these last 5, but the last 8+, that they are rather pretty good. I mean, you could say almost, not quite, but almost say they're talented at developing young guard prospects. You had Will Barton, you had Elliott. If it wasn't for his injuries, he would have been killer. You have Pat Connaughton, who's almost kind of like a reiteration of not only Rudy Fernandez, but a combination of him and Elliott Williams. You just have all those guys. Shabazz Napier gets revived. Andre Miller suddenly seems to be playing a lot better than he was. He seemed to be on a sort of decline. You bring him back, and suddenly he's playing some of the best basketball he's played in a long time. His numbers overall went down, except for assists went up a little bit. His shooting percentages went up. For some reason, there's something about guards, and no matter what iteration of staff we have, that we can sort of develop them. The problem is, or revive them, rejuvenate them. The exact problem is, though, they only can develop their offensive abilities, and then to a certain extent, and it's usually three-point ability and maybe drives, although we produce some wacky, not remotely as wacky as Russell Westbrook, which is absolutely unbelievably out of control and maddening sometimes, but in some rather unorthodox fashions that just aren't seemingly safe. But they're okay with doing that. Mid-range, not so much. Post offense, definitely not at all. It's still made to match the coach. So when we had Nate McMillan, it was more developing their defensive and hustle ability and ability to grab rebounds than it was offense. Though their offense still did develop rather nicely, but that wasn't the efforts that they were giving in development of players. It was actually towards the defensive side and hustle side to match the coach. In this case, it's offense, and the offense is very specifically developed to match what Terry Stotts would require and want in his schemes. And it does not deviate. That's why you have two players that are pretty much exactly the same in CJ and Dame. I don't think there's any specific thing that the team can do anymore to actually fix this. I think the only real route, unfortunately, now is to just finally give in and say we need to blow this completely apart. We never actually did that before because we still had LaMarcia, we still had Nick, and we still had Wes. That was our big three at the time. And then we got Dame. And then CJ. Which is problematic because, right, it was problematic because of the fact that, yeah, we got those picks. That was fantastic. And if you could have kept them, we could have still been a weird reiteration of a dynasty. Dame last night said he feels like in his exit interview, he feels like this was a Golden State, or we are a Golden State right now. And 2009, 2010 seasons, where we're unexpectedly doing better than anybody expected us to do. There's a lot of player development in his mind, especially offensively, and so he thinks that literally we are matching them, which means we have the potential and the ability, and likely already are on track if we stick to what we're doing to develop into a team that could be this current Golden State Warriors that's currently at their peak right now. But there's a lot of inherent problems with why that prove is clearly not at all true. And it's just painful to hear all the excuses, including that our own players are coming up with to try and excuse themselves and say we need to keep this path. It feels woefully apathetic, actually. Like they don't actually want to make progress and they don't want to regress. They just want to stay mediocre as they have been for the last 8, 9, 10 seasons. 8 seasons or so. They just like they're almost addicted to the state of mediocrity that the team has been for almost an entire decade straight, and it's so painful to know that and hear what all the players have to say. I mean, it kind of leads me almost back into the fact that I find it problematic that the players take not a typical defense, they actually bullshit to appease Myers Leonard when they talk about Myers Leonard, whether he's there or not. They want to appease him, so they bullshit and say, "Oh, he's one of our greatest IQ minds. He's one of the best players, the hardest workers on the team. He's honestly just has the best potential, I think. And he's just one of the best teammates we have on the entire team. He always makes sure he's watching film. He always points out all these mistakes. It's just amazing. He's just the best." No, that's a bunch of bullshit. He's not even a coach. He's not even close to that. You're appeasing him, and that's all that is. And that, again, kind of helps prove that this team is really heavily apathetic. They don't really care. And if this playoffs has anything to say along those lines, is that everybody's pretty much guaranteed ultra apathetic, except for a single player on the team. And that's Al-Farouq Aminu. He's been intentionally working his own ass off by himself. He doesn't even wait for coaching staff or development, positions to help him out, or even necessarily other people. He just works his ass off. He's been doing that. In the latter half of the season, he really started to just skyrocket in progress and consistency and confidence. Something you haven't seen out of Al-Farouq Aminu in all the years he's been in the league. You see it streaky, just like a Nick Batum, except more power forward-like in his structure, his abilities, his movements, the way he plays. Except now, he actually seems to potentially have found whatever it is he's needed to gain the confidence and gain the will and the fire he needs to not only have improved so much, but to actually be a dominant player in the league. If he can maintain this is the key phrase I always have when talking about this team, when talking about our Portland Trailblazers, is if he can maintain this amazing amount of confidence and ability and skill and contribution, he could be a dominant player in this league. It's literally the thematic for any Blazers player ever. Is that it was that with Nick Batum, it was that with Myers Leonard for a short time. Unfortunately, that immediately died in fire and acid rain and everything else possible, nuclear explosions. There's so many players that could have ended up amazing and instead ended up sucking royal ass. But there's nobody worse and more obviously that than Myers wasp puppy Leonard. And I'm definitely going to I'm more than motivated and ready to do a video entirely on why he needs to be not just off the team. He needs to be out of the league 3 seasons ago, at least 2, if not 3 seasons ago. Like it's you. I hate him. I hate him. Everything about his game is trash and a half. And also ends my video on what is the real problem and what is really wrong with the Blazers, and thus what actually needs to change. It really is. It's a lot of things, but the main 2 things are what I'm emphasizing in this, obviously. So, to change that, we should hopefully, if done right, start having actual success for once. But otherwise, I have been Danny or Maccam. I hope you've got the gist and enjoyed this video. If you do, please do leave a like. It shows me enjoyed. And if you feel I could improve on certain things, please do definitely give me any suggestions. This is going to be kind of a more rough video, just to kind of get this off my chest, kind of a podcasty one, because I just want to talk about it. I don't even express myself about it. And that's pretty much it. I don't even really care to edit this necessarily. I'm going to, but I don't really care to. So, just... And as a Blazer fan, obviously, I'm frustrated, and I feel really lethargic and spent, because why would you be okay with your own team doing this for 8 straight seasons, and acting like you banging your head against that same wall perpetually is somehow actually proving fruitful, when clearly the only reason why we're talking about it not being fruitful is because it hasn't gotten us anywhere. So there you go. So I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you got the gist of it, and hopefully lots of things, especially Dopo, GM, scouts, get a massive shift this offseason, and hopefully that sends a message to the coaching staff that they need to start picking up their slack, because there is actually quite a bit of slack there, considering nobody challenges each other on our coaching staff really either. Occasionally they do, but it's still offensively focused when they challenge each other. It's not actually defensively, which is literally our biggest problem. Like I said, polar opposite of when Nate McMillan was here. It was offensive as a problem. Now it's defense. It's horrible. Rebounding's horrible. It wasn't a problem under Nate McMillan because, again, opposite-minded coaches. So, opposite-minded GMs, opposite-minded dopos, opposite functioning teams, otherwise having the exact same results perpetually. It's got to change.